Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi, welcoming you to the show. And we're looking at panel discussions once again on this Wednesday evening. Now, there are a number of issues that are topical issues. And the biggest talking point at this point in time is obviously the FIFA 2022 World Cup that is taking place out in Qatar. Now, one must remember that this has been a tournament, one of the biggest tournaments in the world, the biggest stage for football, obviously, and it hasn't been without a controversy. And to a large extent, if one looks at what has been playing out and in the build-up to the tournament, and also as we speak right now, Qatar being used as a political tool. And when one recalls for the wrong reasons, obviously, one of the issues which is of concern, and we will concur, is the treatment of expat workers. But is that the only issue, or are there other issues that are playing out? Now, clearly, the whole LGBT agenda has been playing out in the background as well. Yet, when one looks at the hypocrisy surrounding Qatar and its hosting of the World Cup, when one looks at previous tournaments, and we can go back right up to 1938, where Nazi Germany was allowed to participate in the tournament. We look at 1950, France, despite having butchered 1 million Algerians, they were allowed to participate. In 1970, Nigeria, 1 million people that were killed. Israel, which is considered presumably as part of Europe, Palestine for the last 75 years. So there is this lack of consistency that is being applied. And when one looks at Qatar, which is battered and bruised as a result of migrant workers. Now, all of this has been playing out. And also at the same time, one needs to remember that this has been one of the most expensive sports events held to date. $220 billion that Qatar had to spend on this tournament compared to Russia, for instance, 4 years ago, 11.6 billion. Brazil had spent 15 billion. South Africa, 3.6. Germany has spent 4.3 billion. Now, that says a lot, 220 billion to host this tournament, and it is still not without any controversy. My guest tonight, and it's actually wonderful to be able to link up with both of them this evening, colleagues of mine, and we've had a long association in the media spanning close on to 20 years. And we are joined by Durban-based attorney Saber Jazbhay, and also Ameen Templeton, independent journalist. To both of you, as you appear on screen, I see Saber. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Walaikum assalam. Amazing technology. 1938 they did not have this technology. They had horse and cart. Now we got internet facilities. Amazing.
No, Alhamdulillah. And Alameen, wonderful that able to see you again after such a long time. And welcome to the show.
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to all the listeners out there. Yeah, it is lovely to be chatting to you guys again.
Yes. Now, Saber, I'd just like to start off with you and just to look at what has been playing out in Qatar. Now, clearly, it's highly controversial. Qatar has obviously has had to face up to some severe criticisms as a result of human rights abuses, but also at the same time looking at Qatar and the justification, particularly from the rest of the world, Europe in particular. We've seen Australia. We've seen so many countries in defiance of Qatar, not only because it's a Muslim country, but also looking at many other issues that have been playing out in the background. Just your assessment of what you see playing out at this point in time, particularly in the build-up to this FIFA World Cup final.
Now, my colleague Ameen will probably know that I'm not watching the World Cup for moral ethical reasons because of the human rights violations that are taking place in Qatar of all Muslim countries. But the most important aspect, what is happening there, is a showpiece. I mean, everything is razzmatazz. What is behind the scene is what we don't see, and that is what's happening at this point in time. It is behind the scenes that people are really suffering, that we need to expose out into the open. And by the way, Qatar is not the only place where violations are taking place, but because it is in the forefront of World Cup. It is presenting a fishbowl kind of scenario. We are looking in, and it is fair comment to make what we are doing.
Well, Jazakallah for that, Saber. Ameen, just looking at what Saber has to say, and just your assessment as well as to what he's playing out.
Yes, I thought just before starting off, it'd be worthwhile pointing out also. I mean, the latest human rights abuser that was allowed to host the World Cup, the last one was England in 2012, and I don't recall anyone in the mainstream media complaining about a million dead Iraqis. Libya was about to come, and look what happened. Perhaps we should, as Muslims, be taking advantage of this opportunity to say, okay, from now on, these countries will be forbidden from hosting the World Cup because of human rights abuses, and get a list of banned countries and get it all out and insist as Muslims that this is how we must do it.
It's not going to happen. There is no country in the world that that will escape the hammer and skits of our criticism. So that is why I propose, if you remember, Ameen, an island somewhere in the middle of the Pacific, no one knows about it, and you can have all the stadiums there and no controversies. But
yes.
That is,
Saber, yes, Saber, I think what's
gonna be
important,
another
and
country.
obviously, one needs to respect your personal choice for not wanting to watch the World Cup and for the reasons that you have mentioned, and these reasons are justified. But the key question here is, World Cups have been held in the past, and in my introduction, I quoted statistics. Ameen also mentioned England. He mentioned 1 million Iraqis, looking at France, looking at all these countries, Russia as well, looking at the human rights abuses. And we know Russia is not part and parcel of this World Cup, but that was when the last World Cup was held. But making a big issue of human rights abuses, in particular now that Qatar is hosting it. Is it because it's the first Muslim country hosting it? And why is Qatar being singled out?
I'd like to answer that question, if I may. You see, you raised a very, very interesting and critical point, very valid point, I must say this. But in 1938, you didn't have the Human Rights Declaration. You didn't have human rights, period. You had racism. You had a height of racism started with the Nazi Germany. As the law developed, so do people's morality and ethical changes. And therefore, I said for myself that as a Muslim country, as a Muslim, it is within my right to comment about violations that go against the very tenet of the Quran, which is the first constitution in the world that came out of Medina. So therefore, one looks at this situation carefully, and then one says, Qatar is not being singled out because it's a Muslim country, from my point of view. But it's a valid comment, because all the countries that are complaining are the greatest hypocrites, people like Germany, people like Australia, yet they're playing in Qatar and they get critical, simply because Qatar is trying to impose its own Sharia, its own Islamic orientation. Whether it is succeeding or not, I don't know. But it is simply mind-boggling to go toe-to-toe. Those people say that because Qatar is a Muslim country. Yes, as a Muslim country, Qatar stands as a representation of Muslims, and therefore we got to be critical of the fact that we do not condone what is happening in this Muslim country, as I did in the case of Iran, as I did in the case of Iraq and various other Muslim countries. I stand by my comment.
Well, obviously, Saber, we respect you for your comment, but also, Ameen, as Saber mentioned, is the hypocrisy of the nations, and these are nations that are participating. You look at America, for instance. America has been participating. They've wiped out an entire race. They've wiped out the Red Indians. When you look at the amount of wars that America has been involved in, you spoke of the 1 million Iraqis. Let's not forget Afghanistan, what is playing out in Syria, the support that America gives to Israel, what's been happening to Palestine, America's link with India, what is happening out in Kashmir. So right across the entire world. And these are members of the United Nations. You're looking at permanent members. You're looking at countries like France, for instance. We know France's history. Look at Australia. They've wiped out an entire race in Australia as well. So these are the countries that are preaching morality, and not forgetting, obviously, Britain. And Britain has colonized, and we know what's happened. The Commonwealth, 56 countries that Britain has colonized. And one looks at the damage, the death, the destruction, the looting. All of it has been taking place over a period of time.
Well, the thing is that this is basically Qatar buying the World Cup. I mean, let's face it now, right? FIFA's corrupt. Soccer is corrupt. Organized sport is organized crime. The reason why we spend all this money is because we build stadiums that we can't use anymore. Politicians are able to get a whole lot of bribes by signing on the dotted line. Construction companies make a lot of money. FIFA makes a lot of money, but the host country almost always is on the losing side. Other than Germany, they were able to use existing stadiums, and also England. But the schmuck countries go and build new stadiums. So anyway, Qatar has stepped into the media ring. It's a circus. And the circus is now playing the tunes that it usually is supposed to play. The nice thing about it is that it's given us a perfect opportunity to debunk all of these myths that the mainstream media is always raising. You know, immediately, as soon as they start playing the tired old tune, oh, the Muslims, the terrible Muslims, the terrible Muslims, we're able to turn around and say, but England hosted it in 2012. Germany hosted it while Hitler was the leader. In a way, it provides us with an opportunity to actually hit back and expose the hypocrisy of the nations who are now complaining about as I said in one of my posts, the lizard in the bathroom. You know, they go over there, they kill 1 million Arabs, and then 10 years later they're back in Arabia and they're complaining about the air conditioning. You know, it's preemptive blame, trying to keep the Islamic world on the back foot. But this is an opportunity. The Islamic world should be using this as an opportunity to step onto the front foot and knock them for 6 out of the park. I know it's a soccer tournament, but what the heck?
Well, I think you know, we will obviously look at that and look at how the Muslim world can actually take advantage of the situation, and as you say, mentioned, knock them out of the park. And hopefully, when the next T20 World Cup takes place, we'll have a similar discussion. But Saber, you know, just looking at where we are at this point in time as a Muslim world, okay, anything and everything that the Muslim world does is going to come under the radar. It's going to come under the microscope. It's going to be scrutinized very, very closely. And this is exactly what has happened as far as Qatar is concerned. Now, there were many issues in the build-up to the World Cup. The whole question surrounding the serving of alcohol and drinking of alcohol in public, that came out. The whole LGBT thing came out. We see what Australia had done. They had actually released a video clip prior to this tournament, even prior to getting to Qatar as well, you know, talking about their support. We've seen many countries threatening to wear these armbands in support of the LGBT. Now, all of this, knowing that you are coming into a Muslim country, you need to respect the laws of that country, you need to respect the religion, you need to respect the culture. Yet, again, the hypocrisy we talk about in their own countries. We know of the hijab ban, we know about homegrown imams, we know so much is actually playing out in their very own countries, Saber.
Well, you know, Europe has a test for Europeanness for people wanting to come into Europe. Yes. Maybe there should have been a test for Muslimness, for people wanting to attend the World Cup. Will you be able to spend 2 weeks without alcohol? Will you be able to spend 2 weeks without stripping half naked and streaking down the front street? If you can't do these things, then you're not allowed in.
You know, Europe,
to pass the test of Europeanness, to get a European passport, you have to watch a homosexual porn video. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it really is ridiculous. But maybe just to kind of like highlight the ridiculousness of the test for Europeanness, you should have a test for decency before you're allowed to attend the World Cup.
I think what is important. Yes. I think what is important, and Ameen has made a good comment. I agree with him. or without any issues. But I think the best example is going to be one where the Muslims of Qatar, the Qataris, whatever they are called, show tolerance. I mean, and restraint, obviously. However, if they feel that something is wrong in a public domain, then they must make it known. If I am in Europe, or if I am in as I was recently in New Zealand, I had to obey New Zealand laws in as much as I didn't like it, but I observed it. Similarly, a visitor to Qatar, where he's there for 2 weeks or a month or a whole year, is going to be there. He's got to observe the law. But the issue remains: how do Qataris handle the issue of the rights of, can I use the word, Muslims, the right of non-Muslims in the domain? That is important. And why? And yes, absolutely correct. You raised the issue earlier on by saying because it's a Muslim nation. I agree with you. But if it was any other nation, its record stands out. No Muslim has made, I stand corrected, has made the noise that I have made on Facebook and elsewhere. Why I believe that Qatar needs, why I won't be watching. Not because I disapprove of everything, because I am bound to a set of conditions that are written not only in Western law, not in Western human rights law, but also in the Quran and also in the Hadith and the first constitution, which came out of Medina. So one got to look at it. One got to have a balance, and tolerance is absolutely important. Obviously, I would not tolerate, or I will not countenance a gay and lesbian walking the street and doing the thing. But it's happening. And therefore, we got to show our stand. How do we win? How did Islam become the dominant religion in the world at a particular point? Not through the sword, as the Orientalists make us known, but by virtue of wisdom and by virtue of the way they went around spreading the deen, the practicality of the deen. And that is why Islam is the largest growing religion in Africa today.
Well, certainly, and in fact, right across the entire world. Sorry, Ameen, you wanted to say something?
The thing is, it is. Everything Saber says is true. But at the same time, it's also playing a very familiar tune that you hear beaten on a Western media drum. So, I mean, if we want to address those issues, we have to do it to our own tune. We have to say, yeah, human rights abuses in Qatar, yeah, it's terrible. Their government, which has got mutual defense security agreements with the United States and Britain and France, those countries need to end those mutual defense agreements with that country. And then that government won't have any support, and it will fall, and it won't be able to exploit people anymore. So, get rid of the corrupt governments in Arabia. We mustn't just wipe Israel off the map. We must wipe out all of these little oil fields that are shown to the world as countries. Like Qatar is just an oil field. That's all it is. It's not a country. It's an oil field. Kuwait is just an oil field blocking the Tigris and the Euphrates River access to the Strait of Hormuz. And that's all it is. It's an oil field that's meant to choke an access point. That's all it is. All of those little oil fields around the edges of Saudi Arabia are meant to block Saudi Arabia's sea access to the Strait of Hormuz.
If I may just...
if you want to get rid of all of those human rights abuses, stop those mutual military defense contracts with those countries. Turn the attention, the spotlight back onto the Western countries and say, this is the cause of all the trouble.
Sorry, Saber.
People who living, I always say this, use this phrase, people live in glass houses should not throw stones. And I use this quite often. Recently, today, in another radio station where it was the similar issue that Qatar was raised. And I said it's very simple. Somebody asked me a question, but what about this? What about England? What about Australia, etc.? And the Australians are saying this. I reckon, well, there's a very good saying. People live in glass houses should not throw stones. So therefore, the Australians, the English, the Germans, the Italians have no right to criticize Qatar. But we as Muslims, being blessed with the knowledge that we have the right to tell our fellow Muslim brothers in Qatar or wherever they are, guys, the world is watching. We are in a fishbowl. behave yourself. But at the same time, show that Islam is a modern religion, not a religion stuck to the old ages. That is critical. And that is what the Qatarians are doing right now at this point in time. They are doing the level best. But what is against them is the Western media controlled. They control the narrative. And this is where it is important. In as much as I feel, as I do about Qatar, I believe that time to defend a ideal is critical. And here's an opportunity we have to show Islam as a modern religion.
Well,
yes,
really
but Al-Amin, also I think, Al-Amin, what I'm saying is there not also another agenda that is playing out, and the whole question surrounding morality, and we've seen it last week here in South Africa, where we've seen the Department of Basic Education talking about unisex toilets, or that was still one issue. But this is a movement that is gaining a lot of ground. It's a minority amongst minorities. In South Africa, for instance, it's about 500,000 or 600,000 in a population of about 60 million. But a lot, apart from just, I don't think that the rest of the world cares about what happened to the 15,000 expat workers who died. They don't care because they know about it. They've seen this happen in Saudi Arabia. They see this happening in the Emirates. They've seen it happen right across the Gulf states. And they're doing it in their own country as well in terms of exploitation of workers. They see it in Africa. But the fact that they're singling out these 15,000 expats that had died tells me that there is another agenda that is playing out, using these expats as an excuse for human rights abuses, but at the end of the day, pushing this entire agenda, this LGBT agenda, pushing that through, because that seems to be the major point here.
There's been very definite kind of like activism in places where there never is activism, like the BBC blocking out the opening ceremony, the BBC blocking out the Saudi Arabia's anthem. These things never happen. I was in the mainstream media for many, many, many years, in broadcasting, television, radio. And one thing you don't mess with is the advertisers. You see, you don't mess with the advertisers. You don't mess with the schedules. Everything like that is sacrosanct. The BBC refusing to show the opening ceremony. That's never happened before. Never, ever, ever. From Britain, one of the dirtiest countries in the world. Almost as dirty as the French. It's amazing. It's astounding. It's getting away with murder. That's why. Preemptive blame. Blame them before people start saying, oh, yeah, well, now you're back in Arabia. This is where you killed 1 million Iraqis. You don't want people talking about that. So you want to sort of churn up the issues and raise up the controversies. You want to be the boss of the controversies because you are the most guilty.
Yes, Saber?
I was listening to the wise Al-Amin give his view, and this is not a flattery. I'm making a comment. I'm stumped as to the depth of what he just said now. But what is important is that how do we handle that? I think that's a critical question that you're trying to raise, Inayat. How do we handle a situation of the nature where the narrative, the entire media is controlled by the West? Simple. You create your own media. We've got before Mr. What's his name, Musk start stopping us from using Twitter. We've got the facilities to use to cause a Twitter storm, as it were, about how wonderful, how practical Islam is, and what is the agenda behind Iraq, attacking Iraq through the Western eyes. And that is the critical aspect. And this, in my opinion, in my experience as a lawyer, is where Salam media, etc., come to mind, because your footprint is not only confined to South Africa, but it has a footprint all around the world. And I can safely tell you, right now, people in New Zealand are watching you.
Well,
although it is just about sunrise there. So there are a lot of people watching you.
Well, certainly, and also I think we need to obviously make use of
Right.
whatever is at our disposal, and as much as we've seen playing out on social media, and you mentioned the Twitter storm, but we've seen a lot playing out in social media in terms of where people have actually been taken in, Al-Amin, by the mainstream views. And I'd like your comment, because I know the inner workings of the mainstream media in terms of how it basically controls minds, it controls thoughts of people, it points them into certain directions, and this is exactly what the mainstream media has been doing in the build-up to this World Cup final, where one looks at how they've conditioned minds right across Europe, where to the extent where we've seen ordinary people talking about boycotting the World Cup. We've seen what has come out of Germany, for instance, where I know their pubs are normally full of people watching the soccer, but pubs have actually banned. Now, this is the level to what this mainstream media's influence has been on ordinary people, Al-Amin.
When I look at the whole thing, I can't ignore the fact that UEFA, many of the major football clubs, many of the major domestic soccer competitions are sponsored by Muslim countries, Muslim airways. And I know that the only reason that this is happening is because petrodollars are kept in escrow accounts in London, Paris, and France. They have to be spent. That is Muslim money that has been kept in kufr bank accounts for use by the kuffar, so that they can take that money and say, we have to invest this money responsibly on behalf of the Muslims who are allowing us to keep it in our escrow accounts. And the most responsible place that we can invest this money is in US treasuries. So basically they use this money to pay for their infrastructure. And
Yes.
and the fact of the matter is that the advertising money is showing a sharp decline, particularly when it comes to sporting events. They keep that money up all the time. That's why they're turning around to the Muslim countries. That's why so many Muslim airlines are sponsoring football clubs all over the place.
Yes, but also
Because
I
they don't
think,
have the money
Al-Amin,
themselves. But now the fairness is the piper calls the tune. And basically this is what has happened as far as I can see. Qatar has put his foot down and said, yeah, you know what? We're tired of paying for you guys football clubs and everything. We want to have some football fun here in our own country as well. They put their foot down. And I would say they did. They bought this World Cup. They paid the bribe just like everyone else did. And this is what the Europeans don't like. They don't like the fact that they're actually there as beggars at the World Cup. That is the one thing they don't want the world to really notice. They are there as beggars at the World Cup, and very ungrateful beggars. Very, very ungrateful beggars. The most despised man in Allah's eyes is a proud beggar, and they're full on there in Qatar at the moment.
I actually quite like the way you actually say this, and obviously as beggars, but also Saber. I think one needs to clarify this issue. Qatar has spent $220 billion, which is
billion.
The 220. I mean, the
700
biggest
billion
amount.
rands.
15 billion was the largest amount prior to that, which Brazil had actually spent. Now, what does this actually tell you as well? That none of these countries that are participating in the World Cup have the capacity or the money to host a tournament of this nature. So who do you find? You find a sucker like Qatar. Spend your money. Spend your money. And this is exactly what they've done. And Qatar has actually fallen for this. And despite spending 250 billion, you are now being criticized, from pillar to post. And, you can do absolutely nothing about it. I mean, they talk about boycotting you. Yet, these were the very same companies or same countries. And I'm sure that there are many companies that were part and parcel of building the infrastructure for the FIFA 2020 World Cup from Europe and all over the world.
For sure, they would have got those contracts. they would have had construction cars. I haven't seen any, but I will fall over backwards in shock and surprise if the big European and American construction companies didn't have a big like footprint there in the construction.
And what about the borrowings? You think Qatar paid its own money, 250 billion, or is it borrowed partly through the world financial system? This is important. If Qatar spent its own money to finance the World Cup, that means it'll be 250 billion rands weaker. That is the point. One looks at it. And remember this, Russia is still paying for its World Cup. So is South Africa. We spent 3 billion, right? We're still paying for it. Look at the white elephants we've got in Durban. I mean, it is not even worthwhile anymore. The question remains, somebody put it very nicely, you got all the money, but you got no brains. That is the situation. If Qatar, and I know they are doing this, I know there are two schools of thought in Qatar. There is a school of thought in Qatar that he says, let's use our money, but at the same time, use our intellect to gain more sympathy for Islam and Muslims around the world. And if they're doing that, I think we will follow. I follow the media. I've been following the media for the past 40 years. And I know for a fact that the media in Qatar is not free. It is basically based on what the Emir wants you to know. Now, free flow of information is critical. We don't have free flow of information. We have propaganda flow of information. I've been in these countries, and I know for a fact. And the issue that remains, how do we make sure that the narrative is a balanced narrative? That is pivotal in my mind going forward. How do we handle the situation beyond Qatar? Qatar is not going to be the only showpiece beyond Qatar. And right now, the criticism that is coming out is all based on the Orientalist mentality. So we got to be very careful how we go about this.
Yes, I think we need to, and also, in terms of showcasing Islam or using this World Cup to showcase Islam, will Qatar be able to achieve this objective? Because, when one just looks at the opening alone, Ameen, who was present at the opening and who featured very, very prominently at the opening was Morgan Freeman. Okay, and Morgan Freeman is known to support certain agendas, and particularly when one looks at the LGBT, and on the one hand, you are talking about a Muslim country where this type of behavior or this type of thought is not acceptable in a Muslim country because it goes against Islam. Yet the person that featured very, very prominently was somebody who supports this movement. Now, I mean, where does one actually draw the line?
It's like I said, it's a circus. Dubai has agreed to enter into the circus. And I think Saber is a very interesting point there, actually, as to where those cash flows are going to come from to pay for that 220 billion. You must remember during the 2008 financial crisis, I mean, Greece emerged out of that and was put into basic bankruptcy and lost government control of its country, mainly because it was unable to pay for the debt from the Olympics that it held in 2000.
Yes.
So this is 220 billion. It's a big amount of money. It may be a means for the United States and Britain to hold off on those escrow accounts monies and so, no, these are long-term investments. They cannot be liquidated. You're now going to have to pay for all of your imports with hard cash. And if your current account is in deficit, well, then I'm afraid, your country is going to end up a basket case because, they've been like the bad boy of the good boy bunch, in Arabia, Qatar. Qatar has had an antagonistic relationship. Al Jazeera, it's got the biggest American Air Force base, but Qatar has been a bit of a square nut in a round nut basket. It has stood out. It has been uncomfortable. It has tended to not to follow the rest of the school in Arabia, and it may be that the 2022 World Cup is going to be the nail that basically ensures that Qatar is brought back into line.
Yes. Now, Sabir, let's just look at ourselves as Muslims, and particularly for us who are far removed from the action. We talk about the Arab world on the one side. You're talking about the Gulf countries, but what is playing out in Qatar has been a major debating point within Muslim society. And looking at just South Africa, for instance, you've got two schools of thought, or you've got multiple schools of thought on this matter as well. And this obviously has got the potential also to split the Muslim ummah further down, because we know what has happened during COVID. I mean, that was, I think, for me, was one of the most sickening periods where one saw how the Muslim Ummah had actually split right down the middle. And every time there is a major issue, a major development right across the world, and FIFA 2022 is no exception. It becomes a major talking point, but also at the same time, to our detriment, it actually pushes us even further apart from each other.
The question remains, they say knowledge is power. Now, if you have not the kind of knowledge that we need, and it starts off with Islamic knowledge, but Islamic knowledge is the basis, and from that Islamic knowledge you have Western knowledge. The question remain, how do you harness that knowledge of Islamic knowledge and ameliorate it? In other words, make it consonant with the Western knowledge. And this is where people need to understand. We need to have a balance in our education system. We need to have a knowledge of both the world. Now, how did Islam become so strong? It took Greek, Western philosophy, and it ameliorated it. In other words, it made it consonant with Islamic values. And that is how Islam was able to cross barriers. This is how we got to do it in the 21st century. We got to come out of the camel age, as it were, and to embrace modern age, which grudgingly I would admit Qatar, the United Arab Emirates are doing. However, how do we manage the free flow of information out of Muslim countries? We've got to show that we are a tolerant country. However, we are Islamically based. We must first practice what we preach. And once we practice what we preach equitably, we can then prosper. We can then convince the world that we are serious about our religion and our practice, and just not lip service to make a few mullahs happy. This is important. We've got to understand this. Knowledge is power, and the person who has that power is the person who reads a lot. We don't do that.
Yeah. For me, also another issue is here, the Muslims all over the world are watching this. I mean, it's one of the main issues, I would say, that Muslims all over the world are looking at. But the Qatari government is doing all of this in isolation because it's ring-fenced behind a national border. There isn't like a united Islamic response that's been represented here in any way whatsoever. Even if, like, with the best of their intentions, they're unable to really represent Islam because we fractured and we divided.
Yes, but also at the same time, Ameen, is there, because I've seen a number of posts with regard to using or the FIFA World Cup in Qatar as an opportunity for dawah. Is there potential for dawah?
I agree with you. That this is exactly now what kind of dawah. This is important. The extent you got to have an intellectual dawah, and this is where I believe the Muslim world can really come out, can really shine, and I'm sure Ameen is championing at the bit to add on this. It's how you harness Islamic knowledge. For example, we have to explain to people, whilst I explain to people, whilst I tolerate homosexuality, etc., why it is against my religious beliefs. And that is important. How you articulate that knowledge to the Western world, to the person who supports this kind of thinking, is critical in your power and in your knowledge.
But also, Saber, you know what the Western world does and what the mainstream media is, they are masters at putting Muslims on a defensive. Because this is exactly what they've done as far as this entire LGBT movement is concerned, where even in the build-up to the World Cup, they had got hold of a Qatari gay man who's resident in the United States of America. They did this interview, they pushed this interview right across all channels, right across the entire world. So what they're saying is, you know, put the Muslims on the defensive. Now we need to we need to defend ourselves. We need to explain our position.
You know, again, I must reiterate very calmly, very eloquently, I believe that when issues of gay, etc., come out in the open, how do we as Muslims respond to that? That is critical. Blanket haram, that's it, you're a fundamentalist. But then you explain to them, and I'm going to digress. In one of my discussions on Facebook, I was asked to explain a certain angle of Sharia, why woman gets one share and a husband get two shares, the male get two shares. I had to explain the rationale, the socio-economic rationale of behind that critical. This is what we need to do also in regarding gays and lesbians, regarding all the other attacks against Islam. Again, I come to the same issue. How do you harness knowledge? You can make both Western and Islamic knowledge consonant with one another. And just as the Muslims did when it came to embracing Plato, Aristotle, they used that philosophy. They brought it within the mainstream of Islam. How was that possible? Knowledge, principle. This is what we need to do.
Yes, Ameen?
Most definitely, you know, there's a lot of ground for syncretism. I think is the word that's appropriate here. A syncretic approach to find the similarities between the two different doctrines and to find ways that they overlap and you're able to work together as a society. That is what is needed. But now, look at organized sport. Everywhere in the world, it's completely interlinked with alcohol and gambling. We see, like, Warner of Australia is banned for life because he's a corrupt little. Well, he's very corrupt. He's a corrupt little something. And it is corrupt. It is anti-Islamic, not sport in itself, but the way in which it is packaged and delivered and produced to the world is completely haram. Completely haram. You see, you know, if you want to bring like a chance of playing sport together in a healthy, friendly comradeship, like, you know, is the FIFA model the one that can be fixed, or is the FIFA model the one that has to be thrown out and to say, okay, well, the syncretism starts with a healthy sport and a healthy active lifestyle, healthy competition, competition between nations, coming together, a brotherhood of man. You know, all of those things we can work together with. But as soon as you start saying, okay, well, now you're going to have these particular media organizations are going to be the sole broadcasters and have sole broadcasting rights. These alcohol producers are going to have sole branding rights. You know, as soon as you start talking about that kind of stuff, as soon as you start talking about access of bookies and all of those kinds of things that go into it, it's completely and utterly un-Islamic, anti-Islamic. And, you know, since I become a Muslim, one of the things that irritates me about Muslims is how eager Muslims are wanting to show to Westerners that they can understand them and know what they're talking about. For me, it doesn't do any good. It doesn't do any good. You've got to be able to show them how Islam can do that, you know. And at this Qatar World Cup, we're showing the world that we can also host a World Cup, and we can build soccer stadiums, and we can build the broadcast facilities, and you can get a very clear picture. They don't give a damn about that. There's nothing Islamic about that. And that is like 90% of the effort that has gone into this thing is to show we can spend 220 billion rands to build stadiums. That's not Islam.
Yes, Saber. But also, I think what is also another thing that we need to clarify is when one looks at the Muslim world in general and its inability to respond to any crisis in the Muslim world. I mean, like for instance, if you look at Qatar, Qatar has come under the radar. Okay, which other Muslim country has issued a statement where we've seen the Europeans, we've seen the Australians, we've seen the Americans all coming together, playing out whatever agenda they wanted to play out? Have we seen a collective response from the Muslim world? We've got the OIC, well over 50 countries. We've got the Arab League representing all these Arab nations, which as a collective, why have we not come forward to obviously defend what is being hurled at Qatar at this point in time?
I'd like to answer that question. Again, it's based on very important. Does any of the Muslim countries have a free flow of information? Do they have intellectuals without who don't have to look behind the back when they're talking? That is important. The next angle, the next point that I'm raising issue with that is, do they have the capacity to talk in one voice? Now, I remember well in the early 20th century, they had the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights. Yes, the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights. It was about how Islam is human rights orientated. No one after that, it just refused to hit the mainstream media. Now we need to spell these things out to people about how the Quran is, for example, a human rights aspect, and where it is possible for Islam to allow people to express themselves, but within a particular set of structures. And that is what I'm talking about. We need to tell people that you like to live as gay and lesbian, good for you. This is why we feel it's wrong. Explain to them, not because the Quran says it is wrong, but give them a logical answer. And this is where I admire people like Allama Iqbal. They were able to use Islamic knowledge in a Western world to some extent that people looked at Islam with benevolent eyes. Not anymore. We do not have those intellectual powers anymore. So therefore, we are wallowing like people walking in the dark, trying to light a candle in a storm. That's my take. This is where we are going wrong.
Yes, and also, one cannot ignore the power of these sporting bodies. When one looks at FIFA, and I recall when South Africa hosted the World Cup in 2010, I did an interview with an author of a book who wrote about FIFA, the shenanigans, the inner workings, and just the pure power that FIFA holds, and they can influence governments, they will influence world leaders, and these world leaders will do their bidding, which is exactly what has now happened in Qatar as well. That to the extent that, they try to do damage control with regard to the LGBT issue and the human rights issue, where, in protest, many of them were going to wear those armbands, and suddenly FIFA stepped in and says, if you step onto the field with that band, you're going to get a yellow card straight away. And if you get another yellow card, it means you're out. You're going to be red carded. Now, this is the power that FIFA actually holds, and they try to do damage control to a certain extent. But this is definitely not going to end. This is not going to end, Ameen. The tournament will come, the tournament will go. But I think one needs to also look and have some foresight to look at the consequences this is going to have for Qatar, and it's going to have for Muslims in general.
I can only say in terms of okay, go, Saber.
So, one question, one fact I got to tell you. Would all the public noise about alcohol bans taking place in public, I have been informed that this is still, alcohol is still being advertised in Qatar. It is still being consumed in Qatar, not in a public domain, but in hotels and restaurants. So therefore, you can't say that Qatar is banning alcohol. It is banning alcohol from the Islamic point of view,
Public
but from the
consumption.
practical point of view, it is all going on underground. You have your prostitution, you have your interest transaction, you have all this the forbidden transaction taking place. Whether we like it or not, is happening. This is how we need to control. That is where my point is. Human rights is not just about treating migrant workers well. It is treating human beings as humans. It is central to the very survival of our humanity as Muslims. This is important. And in Islam, you know, as a very learned man told me, we are not talking of individual human rights. We're talking of collective human rights, the human rights of nations. So therefore, I'm not talking of one lowly paid worker who fell to his death. I am talking about the entire humanity that has been ill-treated. And whenever I went to these countries, I observe. I'm an accidental tourist. I look at it from a social justice perspective, and I see people sleeping in corridors, people sleeping in lift shafts. And I ask them, but what happened? Why? That is what we need to expose.
Yes, Ameen.
Yeah, well, you know, I suppose I'd say I was trained as a sociologist. I loved sociology. That was my favorite subject at university. I look at these things from a sociological perspective. Ibn Khaldun's kind of like way of looking at the world.
Yes.
The world's first sociologist, 11th century already. For me, the issue that facing the Muslim world is an issue of family and identity, because we have an extended family society. Our society is built with the extended family as a basic building block. Capitalism is built with a nuclear family. The nuclear family breaks down. The nuclear family is always exposed and in need of kind of some state support, being bailed out, simply because there isn't that tribal kind of like staying together, sticking together, safety in numbers, strength in numbers. We don't maintain it, and it is this here at the aspect of, and when I speak about family, it's not mother and father, it's extended family, it's tribal, just like in Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's time. That's where all the action happened, on the tribal level. And we need to get back to that and understand that that isn't going backwards. No. We are capable of clear, independent, and modern thought, and we're capable of doing that even when we get together in numbers as family. And that is where the strength of Islam comes in, where as soon as you find yourself a nuclear family-based economy, you need corporations, you need medical aids, you need pension funds, you need insurance companies to bail out the nuclear family every time it gets into trouble, as it inevitably and unaffordably every time will. Any father who's head of a nuclear family who's trying to outthink and outguess the interest rates of the Reserve Bank, currency fluctuations, and he's supposed to have a 20-year outlook on saving for a pension. It's a loser's game. It's a loser's game, and that's why all the pension funds are going bankrupt. All the medical aids are going bankrupt. The nuclear family society is an unsustainable society.
Well, let's hope Al-Ameen does not become a loser's game for Qatar, and they don't suffer dire consequences as a result of this. Because we've got about 4 minutes, and just to wind down and just look at some final thoughts. But also, Saber, one needs to, when I'm talking about consequences, we know what is taking place or what has been playing out in Qatar, where Qatari society has been divided on this entire issue. On the one hand, you've got those that would subscribe to morality, to Islamic laws, Islamic values. You're going to get another section of society that is going to be influenced by what is actually taking place. And for me, as Al-Ameen mentioned, family, values, this is exactly what Islam is all about. And this is the biggest concern as to how this is going to impact on society and future generations going forward.
I agree with you. The important aspect is knowledge. Everything, Islam prospered because of knowledge. If we don't use that knowledge, if we don't possess that knowledge, then Qatar is a lost cause. Which brings me to my first point I made. Who is controlling knowledge? The person who controls knowledge got to loosen up on the control of knowledge, allow free flow of information, allow debate. That is the critical aspect of whether Qatar is a losing game or not. And only time will say, only time will tell us whether this is going to go on or not. Maybe in the next 5 years' time, if I'm still alive, if you are still alive, Ameen, we can debate this issue whether Qatar is a winner. But let's look at South Africa. We held the World Cup. Are we free? Forget the corruption and crime.
No, we're still suffering from that World Cup. We're still suffering.
Exactly, yes.
So therefore, time is going to be an ultimate arbiter. It's how you handle the present. The future is going to be dictated. That's my.
For that, Saber. Yes, Ameen, final thoughts.
My final thoughts are $220 billion. That's like 3 times the amount of money that's been thrown at the Ukraine war. Huh? What kind of bang for buck? What kind of return on investment is Qatar going to get from this? I would say, from a business perspective, this has been a loser's game from beginning to end. There's no ways they're going to be able to get the amount of goodwill that they're going to get for spending $220 billion. Very bad business decision, as far as I can see.
Well, we're going to have to leave it at that. Saber Jazbhay and also Ameen Templeton, Jazakallah to both of you. In fact, it's been wonderful connecting with both of you after this such a long period of time, and great having you part and parcel of this discussion we've been having on Salam Media this evening.
Nice to see you guys.
Thank you very much for hosting us.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Well, that brings us to the end of part 1 of tonight's discussion on Wednesday night with myself, Inayat Wadi, and we still have got a lot more to talk about. We've got the whole question surrounding the Constitutional Court and the ruling with regard to the killer of Chris Hani. We're talking about Janus Baluch, and we've got Kodisang Bokaba and also Kim Heller, political analysts, who will be part and parcel of the discussion when we get back after this.